The morning sun cast long shadows across the Renaissance Festival grounds. As Isabella walked through the entrance gates, her heart racing with excitement, she had been looking forward to this day. For months, today wasn't just another day at the festival for her. Today, she would finally compete in the grand tournament wearing the armor she had spent a whole years creating with her own hands. Isabella was 28 years old and worked as a history teacher at the local high school. But her real passion lay in bringing the past to life through historical reenactment. Every weekend, she could be found in her garage workshop, carefully shaping metal, studying ancient techniques, and perfecting her craft. Her friends often joked that she was born in the wrong century, but Isabella didn't mind. She felt more alive when she was connected to history. The armor she carried in carefully padded cases represented more than just metal and leather. Each piece told the story of late nights spent researching museum collections, of burned fingers from the forge, of the satisfaction that came from creating something beautiful and functional. The breastplate bore delicate engravings she had hammered by hand. The arm guards moved like liquid metal when she flexed her joints. It was her masterpiece, designed to fit her body perfectly. As she made her way through the festival grounds, Isabella couldn't help but notice the curious looks from other participants. Medieval reenactment had always been dominated by men, and seeing a woman in full plate armor still turned heads. She had faced doubt and skepticism many times before, but she had proven herself through skill and dedication. Today would be another step in that journey. Isabella, over here, called her best friend Lisa, who was dressed as a medieval merchant. Lisa had been Isabella's biggest supporter throughout the armor-making process, often staying up late to help with research or simply to keep her company during the long hours of work. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Isabella said, setting down her cases near the competitor's preparation area. 2 years of work, and now I get to see if it performs as well as it looks. The tournament preparation area buzzed with activity. Competitors checked their weapons, adjusted their gear, and went through pre-combat rituals that had been passed down through generations of reenactors. The smell of leather oil and metal polish filled the air. Isabella found herself surrounded by knights who had been competing for years, their armor bearing the marks of countless battles. Near the medical tent, a young college student named David was organizing his first aid supplies. At 22, he was working part-time as a festival medic to help pay for his pre-med studies. David had always been fascinated by history, but his practical nature drew him toward helping people in the present. He watched the armored competitors with a mixture of admiration and concern. David had completed wilderness first aid training and had experience dealing with sports injuries, but something about the heavy armor worried him. He had read about historical accounts of knights who had died not from sword wounds, but from heat exhaustion or being unable to get up after falling. The armor looked impressive, but he wondered about the safety protocols. "That's some incredible craftsmanship," David commented to his supervisor as he watched Isabella begin the process of putting on her armor. "But 60 pounds of metal seems like a lot to carry into combat," his supervisor, an experienced paramedic who had worked the festival for years, nodded. "These people know what they're doing. Most of them have been at this for decades. Still, it's good that you're thinking about potential problems. That's what makes a good medic." Isabella began the careful process of donning her armor with Lisa's help. First came the padded undergarments, designed to prevent chafing and distribute the weight evenly. Then the leg armor, each piece secured with leather straps and buckles. The process was like a ritual, each step bringing her closer to transformation from modern teacher to medieval knight. The arm pieces came next, articulated at the joints to allow for full range of motion. Isabella flexed her arms, testing the movement. Perfect. The armor moved with her like a second skin. Lisa helped adjust the back plate, making sure all the straps were properly aligned and secured. Finally came the breastplate, the centerpiece of the entire suit. Isabella had spent months perfecting its shape, ensuring it would deflect blows while allowing her to breathe comfortably. The complex harness system distributed the weight across her shoulders and torso. When Lisa secured the final buckle, Isabella felt the familiar sensation of being encased in steel. "How does it feel?" Lisa asked, stepping back to admire the complete ensemble. Isabella took a few experimental steps, testing the balance and weight distribution. The armor felt perfect, each piece working in harmony with the others. She felt powerful, protected, and ready for anything the tournament might throw at her. "It feels like coming home," Isabella replied, her voice slightly muffled by the helmet's visor. "I've dreamed of this moment for so long." Other competitors gathered around to admire her work. Even the most experienced knights were impressed by the quality and authenticity of her armor. Word spread quickly through the preparation area about the teacher who had created museum-quality armor in her garage. David continued to observe from his position near the medical tent. He noticed how the armor seemed to fit Isabella perfectly, perhaps even too perfectly. The tight fit that made it look so impressive also meant there was very little room for adjustment. If something went wrong, he made a mental note to keep an eye on her during the competition. The morning progressed with weapons inspections and final preparations. Isabella went through her combat routines, testing her mobility and ensuring all her gear was secure. The weight of the armor felt comfortable, now distributed evenly across her frame. She had trained for months while wearing it, building up the strength and endurance needed for combat. As the first round of the tournament approached, Isabella felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. This was her moment to prove that her 2 years of dedication had been worth it. She had faced skepticism, physical challenges, and countless setbacks, but she had persevered. Now, standing in her handcrafted armor surrounded by fellow enthusiasts, she felt ready to make her mark in the world of medieval combat. The announcer's voice echoed across the tournament grounds, calling competitors to their positions. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the familiar embrace of her steel creation. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, this same armor that made her feel so powerful would become her greatest challenge, and that the young medic watching from the sidelines would play a crucial role in her survival. The tournament arena erupted with cheers as Isabella stepped into the combat ring. For her second match of the day, her first victory had been clean and decisive, earning her respect from both the crowd and her fellow competitors. The morning sun had given way to afternoon heat, and she could feel sweat beginning to form under her armor. But her confidence was soaring. Her opponent this time was a seasoned competitor named Robert, a blacksmith who had been participating in tournaments for over 15 years. His armor bore the scratches and dents of countless battles, and his movements showed the fluid grace that only came from years of experience. Isabella knew this would be her toughest challenge yet. "Good luck out there," Robert said as they took their positions, his voice carrying genuine respect. "That's beautiful work you're wearing." Isabella nodded her thanks, gripping her sword firmly. The weight of her armor felt natural now, like wearing a favorite jacket. Every piece moved exactly as she had designed it to, giving her complete freedom of movement while providing maximum protection. She had tested every joint, every strap, every buckle countless times in her garage workshop. The marshal raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Fighters ready, both competitors raised their weapons in acknowledgement. "Begin." The 2 armored figures circled each other cautiously at first, each looking for an opening. Robert moved with the confidence of experience, his sword work smooth and controlled. Isabella matched his movements, drawing on months of training and the knowledge she had gained from studying historical combat manuals. Their first exchange was tentative, sword meeting sword with metallic rings that echoed across the arena. Isabella felt the thrill of excitement as she realized she could match Robert's skill. Her armor absorbed the impact of his strikes perfectly, distributing the force exactly as medieval armor was designed to do. The pace of the fight began to increase. Robert pressed forward with a series of quick attacks, testing Isabella's defenses. She parried each blow, the sound of steel on steel creating a rhythm that had the crowd leaning forward. In their seats, her armor moved like liquid metal, each articulated joint working in perfect harmony. David watched from his position near the medical station, his trained eye noting the intensity of the combat. Both fighters were skilled, but he could see the physical toll the heavy armor was taking. Beads of sweat were visible on their faces through their helmet visors, and their breathing was becoming more labored as the fight continued. Isabella saw an opening and launched a counterattack, her sword singing through the air in a perfectly executed combination she had practiced hundreds of times. Robert stepped back, impressed by her technique, but quickly recovered and pressed his own assault. The turning point came when Robert attempted a particularly aggressive move, a powerful overhead strike that would have been devastating if it had connected properly. Isabella raised her sword to block, but the angle was awkward. Instead of deflecting cleanly, Robert's blade slid down her sword and struck her chest plate with tremendous force. The impact was like being hit by a sledgehammer. Isabella felt the breath knocked out of her as the force drove her backward. Her feet, already struggling for balance on the sandy arena floor, couldn't compensate for the sudden shift in weight. Time seemed to slow as she realized she was falling. Isabella hit the ground hard, landing flat on her back with a metallic crash that silenced the cheering crowd. The impact sent shock waves through her body, and for a moment, she saw stars dancing across her vision. The carefully balanced weight of her armor, which had felt so natural while standing, now pressed down on her like a lead blanket. Time! The marshal called immediately, rushing to check on both fighters. Robert lowered his sword, genuine concern replacing his competitive focus. At first, Isabella tried to laugh it off. Falls were part of tournament combat, and she had trained for this possibility. But as she attempted to push herself up to a sitting position, something felt wrong. The chest plate, which had fit so perfectly that morning, now felt tight against her ribs. The impact had shifted something in the complex harness system that held all the pieces together. "I'm okay," she called out, but her voice sounded strained, even to her own ears. She tried again to sit up, but the armor seemed to be fighting against her. The carefully engineered weight distribution had been thrown off by the fall, and now the straps and buckles that had felt so secure were creating pressure in all the wrong places. Isabella's breathing began to feel restricted. Each breath required more effort than it should have. The chest plate seemed to be pressing inward, preventing her diaphragm from expanding fully. What had started as mild discomfort was quickly becoming genuine difficulty. "Lisa," she called to her friend, who was already running toward the arena. "Something's not right with the armor." Lisa reached her side and immediately began trying to help Isabella to her feet, but the armor's weight made it nearly impossible. Worse, as they struggled, Isabella's breathing became more labored. The complex system of straps and buckles that had taken them 20 minutes to fasten that morning now seemed like an impossible puzzle. "I can't get the chest piece loose," Lisa said, panic creeping into her voice as she fumbled with the buckles. The leather straps had twisted during the fall, and the metal fittings were jammed in positions she didn't recognize. "Isabella, talk to me. How do you feel?" "Can't breathe properly," Isabella gasped, fighting against rising panic. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She was trapped inside her own creation. The armor that had made her feel so powerful and protected had become a prison. The perfectly fitted plates that had moved like a second skin were now pressing against her chest. With each attempted breath, the crowd, which had been cheering moments before, now watched in concerned silence. Other competitors gathered around the arena's edge, their own armor suddenly feeling heavier as they witnessed what was happening. Robert knelt beside Isabella, his face pale with worry. "We need to get this armor off her now," he said to Lisa. But neither of them understood the complex fastening system well enough to work quickly under pressure. David saw the situation developing from his medical station and grabbed his emergency kit. As he ran toward the arena, his mind was already working through the problem. This wasn't a typical sports injury or heat exhaustion case. This was something entirely different, something his textbooks had never covered. Isabella's breathing was becoming more shallow and rapid. The weight of the armor, combined with her position on the ground and the shifted chest plate, was creating a perfect storm of respiratory distress. Her lips were beginning to show the first faint traces of blue, a sign that her body wasn't getting enough oxygen. "Please," she whispered to Lisa. genuine fear now evident in her voice. I can't breathe. The medieval festival, with all its pageantry and celebration of historical combat, had suddenly become the scene of a very modern emergency. Isabella's masterpiece of medieval engineering had become a life-threatening trap, and time was running out to free her from the armor that was slowly suffocating her. David reached the arena and immediately began assessing the situation. His medical training told him exactly what was happening, but the solution was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Isabella's life now depended on solving a puzzle of medieval engineering, under the most extreme pressure imaginable. David dropped to his knees beside Isabella, his medical training kicking in immediately. But as he looked at the situation, his heart sank. This wasn't like anything he had studied in his textbooks or practiced during his first aid courses. Isabella wasn't having a heart attack or suffering from a broken bone. She was trapped inside 60 pounds of perfectly fitted steel that was slowly preventing her from breathing. "What's your name?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm and steady, while his mind raced through possible solutions. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice getting weaker. "I made this armor myself. I know every piece, but I can't reach the buckles." David quickly checked her pulse. It was racing, which was expected given her panic. But what worried him more was the slight blue tint he could see around her lips. Her oxygen levels were dropping, and they were dropping fast. "Okay, Isabella, I'm David. I'm a medic, and I'm going to help you," he said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "Can you tell me exactly what's wrong?" "The chest plate," Isabella gasped between shallow breaths. "When I fell, something shifted. It's pressing on my ribs. I can't expand my lungs properly." David looked at the intricate system of leather straps, metal buckles, and articulated plates that made up Isabella's armor. It was beautiful craftsmanship, but right now it looked like a death trap. The chest piece had indeed shifted during the fall, and the complex harness system that distributed the weight so perfectly when she was standing was now working against her. Lisa was still frantically trying to loosen buckles, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the leather straps. "I helped her put this on this morning, but it's all twisted now. I don't know which straps to loosen first." The festival's head medic, an experienced paramedic named Patricia, arrived with additional equipment. She took one look at the situation and immediately called for backup. "We need the fire department here now," she said into her radio. "We have a woman trapped in medieval armor with breathing difficulties." But even as she made the call, Patricia knew it would take too long. The nearest fire station was 20 minutes away, and Isabella didn't have 20 minutes. Her breathing was becoming more labored with each passing moment. "How long until the paramedics get here?" David asked. "They're already on their way, but it's going to be at least 15 minutes, Patricia replied. "The armor is too complex for them to deal with quickly anyway. They'll want to transport her to the hospital, but moving her like this could make things worse." David studied the armor more closely, trying to understand its construction. He had been watching the competitors all day, fascinated by the historical accuracy of their equipment. Now that casual interest might be the key to saving Isabella's life. "Isabella, walk me through how this comes apart," David said, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Start with the most important pieces," Isabella tried to explain, but speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. "Back plate," she managed to say, "has to come off first. Main support for chest piece." David moved around to examine Isabella's back. The back plate was held in place by a complex system of straps that connected to the chest piece. During the fall, these straps had twisted and tightened, creating a web of leather that was pulling the chest plate tighter against Isabella's ribs. With each breath she tried to take, the crowd around the arena had grown silent, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Other armored competitors began removing their own gear and offering advice, but the noise was making it harder for David to concentrate. "Everyone please step back and give us room to work," Patricia called out. "If you have experience with armor, stay close, but keep it quiet." Robert, Isabella's opponent from the match, stayed nearby. He had been competing for years and understood armor construction better than most. The problem is the articulation points, he said quietly to David. When she fell, the plates shifted. Now they're locked in a position that's compressing her chest cavity. David nodded, beginning to understand the mechanical problem they were facing. It wasn't just a matter of removing straps and buckles. The armor pieces had to be repositioned in a specific sequence to release the pressure on Isabella's chest. Isabella's breathing was becoming more desperate. Each breath was a struggle, and David could see the fear in her eyes. The blue tint around her lips was becoming more pronounced, indicating that her blood oxygen levels were dangerously low. Isabella, I need you to try to stay calm, David said. Though he knew how impossible that request was. Panic makes you breathe faster, which makes this worse. Focus on my voice and try to take slow, steady breaths. But staying calm was easier said than done. Isabella could feel the walls of her armor closing in around her. The steel that had made her feel so powerful and protected now felt like a coffin. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to get out, to break free, but she was completely helpless. Lisa was crying now, feeling responsible for not being able to help her best friend. This is my fault, she kept saying. I should have been able to get her out of this. This isn't anyone's fault, David said firmly, never taking his eyes off Isabella. Accidents happen. Right now, we just need to focus on fixing this. David began working on the back plate straps, but quickly realized that simply loosening them wasn't enough. The plates were locked together in a way that required them to be moved in a specific sequence. It was like solving a three-dimensional puzzle, while someone's life hung in the balance. Robert, I need your help, David said. You understand how this armor works better than I do. Robert immediately knelt beside them. The shoulder connections are key, he said. If we could release those, the back plate should shift enough to relieve pressure on the chest piece. Working together, David and Robert began the delicate process of repositioning the armor pieces. But time was running out. Isabella's breathing was becoming more shallow, and she was starting to show signs of confusion, indicating that her brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. The situation was becoming critical. Traditional emergency medicine had no answers for this problem. Isabella's life depended entirely on their ability to understand and manipulate a piece of medieval technology under the most extreme pressure imaginable. David looked at Isabella's pale face and made a decision. The paramedics weren't going to arrive in time, and even when they did, they wouldn't know how to deal with this situation. It was up to him and Robert to free Isabella from her steel prison before it was too late. We're going to get you out of this, David promised, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Isabella's eyes met his, filled with trust and desperation. Her life was literally in their hands. David's hands were steady despite the pressure, his medical training taking over as he assessed the mechanical puzzle before him. Isabella's breathing had become so shallow that he could barely see her chest moving. Her lips were now distinctly blue, and her eyes were starting to lose focus. They were running out of time, and everyone around them knew it. Talk to me about the shoulder connections, David said to Robert, his voice calm but urgent. How exactly do they work? Robert pointed to the articulated joints where Isabella's arm pieces connected to the chest and back plates. See these pivot points? They're designed to move together. When she fell, the impact drove everything out of alignment. The back plate is now pulling the chest piece tighter against her ribs. David nodded, beginning to understand the engineering problem they faced. Medieval armor wasn't just clothing. It was a complex mechanical system where every piece depended on every other piece. One shifted component could throw the entire system out of balance. Isabella, can you hear me? David asked, gently touching her hand. Her eyes focused on him. With effort, I need you to try something for me when I say so. Try to lift your right shoulder just a tiny bit. Can you do that? Isabella managed a weak nod. Even that small movement seemed to take enormous effort. David positioned his hands carefully on the shoulder connection, feeling for the mechanism that Robert had described. The metal was warm from Isabella's body heat and slick with perspiration. His fingers found the pivot point just as Robert had explained. Now, Isabella, very gently. Isabella tried to lift her shoulder, and David felt the armor piece shift slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to understand how the system worked. The problem was that everything had to move together in perfect coordination. Robert, I need you to support the back plate while I work on this connection, David instructed. If it drops when I release this joint, it could make things worse. Other festival participants had gathered around, forming a protective circle. Someone had brought tools from the blacksmith demonstration area. Another person held a bottle of water, ready to help Isabella drink once she could breathe properly again. Lisa knelt by Isabella's head, stroking her friend's hair and whispering encouragement. "You're going to be okay," she kept saying. "David knows what he's doing. Just hold on a little longer." David began working on the first shoulder connection. The mechanism was beautifully crafted, designed to allow full range of motion while maintaining structural integrity. But the fall had jammed the articulation point, and forcing it could damage the armor or, worse, hurt Isabella. "There," David said as he felt the first joint release with a subtle click. "That's one." Immediately, Isabella took a slightly deeper breath. The small change in the armor's configuration had relieved just enough pressure to give her a tiny bit of relief, but they were nowhere near done. "How are you feeling?" David asked. "Little better," Isabella whispered. "But still can't breathe, right?" David moved to the other shoulder connection. This one was more difficult because Isabella was lying on her side, and he couldn't get the same angle. Robert helped lift her slightly, careful not to put additional pressure on her chest. As David worked on the second connection, he kept talking to Isabella, partly to assess her condition and partly to keep her calm. "Tell me about making this armor. How long did it take you to figure out these joints?" Isabella's voice was weak, but talking seemed to help her focus on something other than her fear. 6 months just for the shoulders. Had to study museum pieces. Read old books about how they were made. Well, your research is helping save your life right now, David said, finally feeling the second shoulder joint release. "Robert, can you help me rotate the back plate?" Working together, they carefully shifted the back plate away from Isabella's spine. The change was dramatic. Isabella immediately took her first full breath. In nearly half an hour, gasping with relief as her lungs finally had room to expand. But they weren't finished yet. The chest plate was still pressing against her ribs, held in place by the complex harness system that distributed the armor's weight. "The main chest strap," Isabella said, her voice already stronger now that she could breathe better. "It runs under the back plate. If you can find the release point, the whole chest piece should come free." David felt round the edges of the back plate, searching for the strap Isabella had described. His anatomy knowledge helped him understand how the harness system was designed to work with the human body's natural structure. "Found it," he said, locating a leather strap that had been completely hidden when the armor was properly aligned. The strap was twisted and pulled tight, creating tension that drew the chest plate inward with each breath Isabella attempted. But the buckle was jammed. The fall had not only twisted the strap but had bent the metal buckle itself. David realized he would need to cut the leather to free Isabella completely. "Does anyone have a knife?" he called out. Several people immediately offered tools. A leather worker from one of the craft booths handed David a sharp knife specifically designed for cutting thick leather. "Isabella, this is going to release a lot of pressure all at once," David warned. "Are you ready?" Isabella nodded, tears of relief already forming in her eyes as she anticipated being able to breathe freely again. David positioned the knife carefully against the twisted strap. He had to be precise. Cutting the wrong piece could cause other parts of the armor to shift dangerously. With one quick, confident motion, he sliced through the leather. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The chest plate suddenly loosened, no longer pulled tight against Isabella's ribs. She took her first completely unrestricted breath in over 30 minutes, gasping and crying with relief. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "I can breathe. I can actually breathe." The crowd around them erupted in cheers and applause. Patricia, the head medic, immediately began checking Isabella's vital signs, while David and Robert carefully removed the remaining pieces of armor. Your oxygen saturation is coming back up, Patricia reported. Heart rate is still elevated, but that's normal after what you just went through. As the last pieces of armor were removed, Isabella sat up slowly, supported by Lisa and David. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, but she was breathing normally. The medieval gown she wore under the armor was soaked with perspiration, evidence of the physical ordeal she had endured. "You saved my life," Isabella said to David, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." David shook his head modestly. "We all worked together. Robert understood the armor. You guided us through the process, and everyone here helped create the space we needed to work." The paramedics arrived just as Isabella was taking her first sips of water. They were amazed to find their patient sitting up, breathing normally, and surrounded by pieces of medieval armor. It wasn't exactly the scene they had expected when they received the emergency call. As the immediate crisis passed, Isabella looked at the armor pieces scattered around her masterpiece. 2 years of work and passion had nearly become her tomb, but it had also brought together a group of strangers who had worked as a team to save her life. The tournament was over for Isabella, but something much more important had begun. She had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the armor we wear, but from the people who surround us in our darkest moments. 3 days after the tournament, Isabella sat in her living room, still feeling the phantom weight of armor on her shoulders. The hospital had kept her overnight for observation, and the doctors had confirmed what everyone already knew. She had come very close to a much more serious outcome. Her oxygen levels had dropped to dangerous levels, and without David's quick thinking, the story could have ended very differently. The local news had picked up the story, calling it a medieval rescue in modern times. Isabella found herself uncomfortable with the attention, but she was grateful that the coverage focused on the heroic actions of David and the other festival participants who had helped save her life. Her phone had been ringing constantly since she returned home. Fellow armor enthusiasts from around the country were calling to check on her and to discuss safety modifications for their own equipment. The medieval reenactment community was tight-knit, and news of the accident had spread quickly through online forums and social media groups. But the call Isabella was most looking forward to came on Wednesday afternoon. David's voice was warm and familiar when she answered the phone. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Really feeling. Not just the polite answer you're probably giving everyone else." Isabella smiled, appreciating his directness. "Honestly, I'm scared," she admitted. "I keep thinking about how helpless I felt in those moments when I couldn't breathe. I've always prided myself on being independent, on solving my own problems. But there was nothing I could do." "That's completely normal," David said. "You went through a traumatic experience. Have you thought about talking to someone about it?" They talked for over an hour. David shared that the experience had affected him too. He had been replaying those critical moments in his mind, wondering if he could have worked faster, if there was something else he could have done. Isabella reassured him that he had been amazing under pressure, but she understood the weight he was carrying. "I've been thinking," Isabella said as their conversation wound down. "I want to do something to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Would you be interested in working together on some kind of safety protocol for medieval reenactment?" David was immediately interested. The experience had shown him how unprepared the medical community was for this type of emergency. Most paramedics and emergency room doctors had never seen medieval armor, let alone understood how it functioned. Over the following weeks, Isabella and David began collaborating on a comprehensive safety guide for historical reenactment events. Isabella provided the technical knowledge about armor construction and common failure points, while David contributed medical expertise about the physiological dangers and emergency response procedures. Their first meeting took place at Isabella's workshop, where she showed David the armor that had nearly trapped her. She had been reluctant to enter the space at first, but David's presence made it easier. "This is where it all started," Isabella said, running her hand along her workbench. 2 years of research, planning, and crafting. I was so focused on Historical accuracy and perfect fit that I never considered what would happen if something went wrong. David examined the armor pieces carefully. The craftsmanship is incredible, he said, but you're right about the safety issues. The very things that make it authentic, the tight fit, the complex harness system, are what created the danger. Together, they identified several modifications that could be made to tournament armor without sacrificing historical accuracy. Quick-release mechanisms hidden inside traditional-looking buckles. Pressure points that would prevent chest pieces from compressing too tightly. Emergency access panels that would allow rapid removal in crisis situations. Isabella's attitude toward her hobby began to evolve. She still loved medieval history and the craftsmanship involved in creating authentic armor. But she now understood the importance of balancing authenticity with safety. She began designing a new suit of armor that incorporated the safety modifications they had developed. David found that the experience had clarified his career goals. He had always been interested in emergency medicine, but the armor incident had shown him how much he enjoyed problem-solving under pressure and working with unusual medical situations. He began focusing his studies on emergency medicine with a specialization in trauma response. Their safety guide was published 6 months after the tournament, both as a printed manual and as an online resource. The medieval reenactment community embraced it enthusiastically, and several major festivals began requiring safety certifications based on Isabella and David's protocols. Isabella returned to competition the following year, wearing her new armor and carrying a small tool specifically designed for emergency armor removal. She had lost none of her skill or passion for the sport, but she now approached it with a healthy respect for the risks involved. More importantly, she had gained something she hadn't expected, a deep friendship with David and a new understanding of the strength that comes from accepting help from others. The independent streak that had driven her to create her masterpiece in solitude had given way to an appreciation for collaboration and community. David, meanwhile, had discovered that his calling lay not just in traditional emergency medicine, but in preparing for the unexpected situations that textbooks never covered. The armor rescue had taught him that the most challenging medical emergencies often required thinking outside conventional protocols. On the first anniversary of the tournament incident, Isabella and David met at the same festival where everything had happened. Isabella was competing again, wearing her new safety-modified armor. David was there as a volunteer medic, but also as a friend supporting Isabella's return to competition. As Isabella prepared for her first match, David helped her check all the safety releases they had developed together. The process took only a few extra minutes, but it gave both of them peace of mind. "Are you nervous?" David asked as Isabella put on her helmet. "A little," Isabella admitted, "but I'm not letting fear keep me from doing what I love. Besides, I know you'll be watching." Isabella won her first match easily, her new armor performing flawlessly. As she raised her sword in victory, she looked toward the medical station where David was watching with a proud smile. The tournament continued without incident, but the real victory had happened long before the first sword was drawn. Two people had faced an impossible situation and found a way through it together. They had taken their shared trauma and transformed it into something that would help protect others. In the months that followed, Isabella and David continued to collaborate on safety research and remain close friends. The armor that had nearly killed Isabella now sat in her workshop as a reminder, not of fear, but of the incredible things that can happen when people work together in moments of crisis. Isabella had learned that true strength wasn't about facing challenges alone, but about building the relationships and systems that help everyone face challenges together. And David had discovered that sometimes the most important medical knowledge isn't found in textbooks, but in the willingness to think creatively and act decisively when lives hang in the balance. Their story became legend in the medieval reenactment community, not just as a cautionary tale about safety, but as an inspiring example of how crisis can bring out the best in people and lead to lasting positive change.